Hello, my name is Thomas Estermann. I'm the Rector of Governance, Funding and Public Policy Development at the European University Association. It is my great pleasure to host this one of the last sessions of the EURIE Summit. I'm going to be delighted to have this session where we're going to talk about the impact of Corona on universities, particularly in this last year. And I have with me here on this session my colleague Michael GAEBEL, who is the Director of Higher Education Policy at EUA, responsible for everything related to learning and teaching, the work that we do in relation to the Bologna process and internationalization, digitalization. And with us is also Dr. Marina CAVALLINI from she's head of international relations at the Italian Rectors Conference, CRUI. She's also been very long in that post. So I'm really looking forward to discussing among the three of us the impact of COVID-19 on universities. The way we go into this session is we will all have presentations where we talk about certain topics among three of us, and then after the presentation set, we will have a discussion where we either answer your questions or we will also reflect on sort of the future outlook for universities after that impact of COVID-19 and what transformations might stay with us. So let me start now and get my presentation ready. There we are. First of all, just a few words on EUA. We are the largest membership organization representing universities in Europe, with over 800 universities as members and also over 33 national university associations, among them CRUI from Italy. Our main activities are really to facilitate the dialogue on higher education and research at European level, but also at national level. And we are making sure that the voice of the sector is heard in these important policies for universities. And we have a range of activities for our members with events, studies, and from some of these studies, we will share some of the information. I will start with the impact of funding of COVID-19 on European universities. We've done last summer, autumn, we collected data from 29 higher education systems. You see them on the slide, including Turkey, where we asked the immediate impact on the pandemic on university funding and governance, and also what would be the expectations. And out of that, we've also gave some conclusions on what would be the best ways to mitigate those effects. Now, let me show you first the three most impacted area on economic impact of the lockdown measures in March. You can see them here are student mobility, international student admission, and staff mobility. Well, I would say to no surprise, you can see in between 13 and 15 system indicated that this has been a high impact, and between 6 and 5 indicated still medium high impact. But equally, learning and teaching has been impacted. Michael will talk about this in more detail, also research, but also infrastructure, to a lesser extent, equipment. When we talk about the immediate impact on university income, you can see that services is the area that has been impacted in 22 higher education systems quite immediately. You can see on the on the side which services this would include. So, for example, this would be rental of rooms or student accommodation. So also income that universities usually benefit from and transfer to the main missions. The second most impacted area has been contractual research, and the third one also tuition fees from international students. So these are the most impacted areas. On the other hand, we also found that universities received financial support from public funding, particularly for research, corona-related research, but also for strengthening in general research capacity or investment in infrastructure and digitalization, or for extra student aid. I said we also asked about the expectations. So this was really immediately after a very short time in the corona crisis. And according to the three main funding streams for European universities, we asked them core national funding, competitive funding, and also European funding. And you can see there are quite a large number who expected that this will continue to stay rather stable, although 7 system expected it to go down in the medium term for national funding and also for competitive funding. But what's striking here is that you have a very large number of systems that didn't know. So that was really a high degree of uncertainty. And I can confirm this is going to continue. But I have to say, now that we are a year into the corona modus, people are more pessimistic about this development. Also, just one slide on changes in private funding. Here you have tuition fees from domestic students are expected to stay rather stable. We can also see in some countries they're even going up. But what's clearly impacted and continue to be impacted is tuition fees from international students and contractual research. Equally, services at the same level. And what you can see here, high degree of uncertainty about philanthropic funding, where really there is the expectations of we don't know in which direction this will go. The last slide I want to show you is here the investment needs that we've asked in the systems, and clearly on the top is investment need in digital infrastructure. 25 clearly said here we need to make significant investments, but also on staff training. This was also, we heard quite a lot over the past days in this summit, where not all staff is familiar with the new formats of delivery. So this is clearly a new investment need. I will stop it here to give you this first insight into the impact of funding on universities, and I will hand over to my colleague Michael, who will tell you more about the areas of learning and teaching and research and internationalization. So over to you, Michael.
Well, thanks, Thomas. And I also have a few slides to share. So, as Thomas showed you already the big picture and how that impacted the different parts of the institution, I'm delving here more in 3 particular areas in learning and teaching, research and internationalization. And what you see here are outcomes from focus groups that we had, and also from a larger survey that we launched in the first half of 2020. And I give you the reference to that later on in the chat. When Well, as you probably know the situation from your own institution, if you are from a higher education institution, it was a very ad hoc, very abrupt change. And we can confirm that in Europe in the first 1.5, 2 months, about 90% of the institution moved to online and blended learning in order to make up for the situation. This had all kinds of impacts, but one immediate impact that we saw is that it led to an enforced upscaling and mainstreaming of existing approaches, and then also to some kind of innovation, you could say. So it was a bit of a joining the dots exercise. At many institutions had already, at least in some parts of the institution, some experience of online and blended learning and teaching. And this was then relatively quickly shared with colleagues and put up. It was quite a stress test, and it also unveiled some of the gaps and the scope for improvement. And I just mentioned a few one, and I'm sure regardless your country background, your system, your institution, you will have had discussions about testing and examinations. And I think the interesting thing is here that this was not just about online, but it also put a question mark to what should actually be tested and examined in general. And we have seen a big move in some countries to, let's say, open book exams, for example. Another interesting thing was the issue about skills. And I just quote here a number from the index survey of the Irish National Forum, which ran a big survey in Ireland just in the end of 2019. So they had pre-COVID data. And they found that actually in 2019, 70% of the academics had no prior online teaching experience. So I think there's no reason to believe that in other countries in Europe, academics have been much more experienced. So that must have been the situation everywhere. And we also know that students, while we often talk about them as digital natives, they may know their ways on the internet and through their phones, but they may never have used it really for working on it, for studying through the internet. Another indicator that we can share here, if you ask institutions about the resources that they have for digitally enhanced learning to support it, you get relatively positive responses from them. So I just share here one figure. 90% said in our survey that they offer open online library access to students. But 65% of them also mentioned that in the crisis, they had to enhance it because it was clearly not enough for all staff and students. And as a consequence, 3/4 of the higher education institutions that responded to our survey, and this were more than 360 institutions across 48 countries in Europe, 3/4 of them had concrete plans to enhance digital capacity beyond the actual crisis management. And it also may have had an impact on curriculum revision. At least this is the feedback that we got through the survey, but also in talking to institutions. So many of them started to explore and to think what also beyond the crisis this could, what sort of blended, or there's also talk about more ambitious hybrid approaches where you use actually the face time and online time in a more strategic fashion. I think the impact on research and innovation has been in some respects quite similarly. Also there, the feeling is that the quick move to online worked actually relatively well, probably much better than it would have some years ago, some years before. So institutions, while they were not prepared, they were able to cope with the situation. And this resulted, for example, in more collaborative research and lab use. But nevertheless, you could see that also there were difficult situations. And in particular, when we looked on the situation of early career researchers, and in particular, those on a grant with tight timelines, who could not work together with their advisors, or who could not go into their labs, or who were in other ways disrupted in their research. More on the positive side, probably, or towards changes that are needed. So what we could see clearly was a need, or let's put it like this, open science and interdisciplinarity have been confirmed in the crisis, and more need for it was actually became obvious. If you think about, for example, virology and epidemiology, how important it is to share data across systems among institutions, research and higher education institutions, access to data and also to publications. And what also has been confirmed was cooperation with external stakeholders, be that companies, but also public authorities, citizen initiatives, and I think a big question is how that could be continued beyond the crisis, because in many institutions this was experienced as something that was found extremely positive and probably beyond the expectations than that one would have. A more particular question is then also how universities in the future could become a more relevant partner for the digital industries. And all in all, I think the bottom line question is here, the clear value of universities towards society and creating really the social value. How can we further innovate this and better continue and demonstrate it beyond the current crisis? And that's my last point. Thomas had also already mentioned the internationalization and the impact that it had on international academics and students, more from their personal or from the social situation. Then they were in a really particular situation, as many of them were found somewhere in confinement, either at home or abroad or somewhere in limbo. So probably a more difficult situation than their colleagues, who at least had the feeling they were at home. And what made it even harder then was also that borders were closed, no visas issued, and access to application processes for study abroad were also put on hold for quite some time. So this has impacted clearly mobilities and cooperation. I think not only because of the border closings, but also because institutions for a while were busy with getting organized on the ground and had not so much time to think about their international collaboration. But we saw then that there is a gradual return now and pivoting to virtual meetings and also partially to virtual mobilities. Also, as everybody has understood that you cannot wait with your collaboration until the crisis is over, because until now nobody really knows how long that will take. Mobility has decreased, as Thomas said, in Europe to some extent, but nevertheless the decreases were probably to some extent lower than one would have expected, probably also because many of the international students, they were without alternative. Rather than waiting a year, you probably took the risk and nevertheless went for your international study place with the uncertainty on whether you would do that on campus or online abroad. But what also turned out, and I think that's something that has been emerging, that's not completely new, but it has been emerging in international collaboration, is the potential of digital. I remember around 2014, when we checked that through little surveys, at that time, at least in internationalization strategies, digital didn't play any role. But if you look there in the table, the numbers that I give you, the experience over the past 5 years, where institutions indicated that they actually started to use it much more for interinstitutional collaboration and also for outreach to international students. And if you then look at the expectation, what it would mean in the 5 years upcoming, where more than 80% say it will further transform the interinstitutional collaboration and outreach to international students. So there is a very positive outlook on this side of what digital could mean for international collaboration. And we see that also for virtual student mobility, which at the time of the crisis, just 25% of institutions had in place. But beyond the crisis, 35% indicate that they want actually also to offer virtual student mobility, probably not to replace the physical student mobility, but as a complementary and additional option. So that's from my side. And if you have any questions or comments on that, please write them in the chat. And I hand here on to Marina, and afterwards we would have time to discuss your questions and comments. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Michael, for this tour. I don't have any ad hoc questions yet. I will monitor them. As Michael said, if you've got any questions, you have the opportunity to put them down below the screen, and we will pick them up after Marina's presentation. So without any further request, we will hand over to Marina to share with us how the impact was in Italy and how you've dealt with it.
Okay, thank you very much to you, Thomas, and thanks also to Michael for your interesting presentation. My name is Marina Cavallini, and I'm the head of International Relations Office at the Conference of Italian University Rectors, which is the association of all the state and non-state Italian universities. I greet all the people attending this session. And as Thomas already said, I'm going to explain how the Italian higher education system reacted and reorganized after the pandemic crisis, which have been the main impacts on the system and the main challenges to cope with. So exactly 1 year ago, Italy went into lockdown. Did we expect what happened? No, absolutely no. Were we ready to react? Yes, we were ready. Our universities immediately reacted, adapting and innovating. 100% of the university courses moved online within a couple of weeks, and also examinations and graduation sessions were guaranteed to students on online platforms. Researchers and medicine students contributed to give support, working on projects for innovative masks and breathing systems, or giving practical support in hospitals. From May to September, the universities gradually reopened, adopting specific guidelines, which are in line with the national and the local rules, so they are constantly and continuously updated. From September started the new academic years, but again under hard measures to limit the spread of infection. We faced the second pandemic wave in October, November, in winter, and we are now facing the third wave. So the process of totally reopening the universities is difficult, more or less in every country, but also in Italy. To sustain universities, extra funds were allocated. And I will go in a few minutes on more detail on this aspect. And also an extension of the academic year till June 2021 was decided to allow all the students to discuss their final thesis or to complete their academic year. And also an extension for last year doctoral candidates was decided in the first time of 2 months and then prolonged for 3 more months. Well, ready to react and ready to restart. The priorities for we call phase 2 and 3 of the pandemic were how to guarantee safe access to buildings for students, academic staff, and administrative personnel. So also the epidemiological risk is taken under control by reviewing every 2-3 weeks sanitary and social rules according to 4 main levels of pandemic risk corresponding to 4 colors from white to red. So the 20 Italian regions take a different color corresponding to the level of risk. And at present, only one region was declared white a few days ago, but it is an isle, so it's quite easy for the island to be isolated. And we have not overcome the epidemiological risk because for some regions, the perspective of becoming dark orange or red is a reality. So other priorities for universities, as in many other countries, I'm sure, are strengthening digital infrastructure, reorganizing international programs, and focusing on virtual mobility, as also Michael underlined. Training administrative staff, because the dematerialization of administrative procedures, as everybody is on smart working, require new skills. And also give adequate financial support to students, and also manage students and campus life, because in campuses the risk of spreading the virus is higher. Now, the impact of the pandemic on the academic system. The highest impact was on teaching and on mobility, in line on what also Michael and Thomas underlined. In the first phase of the pandemic, there was a reorganization in full online modality of all the university courses. And then in a combination of a distance and face-to-face teaching. Now there is ongoing an overall revision of contents. So to integrate digital teaching with face-to-face teaching, remote, synchronous and asynchronous lecturers, examinations, virtual classes, group of activities, because academic teaching is very composed. So also the distance teaching has to be to adapt to the core of the teaching. International mobility was the most affected, both for incoming and outgoing people, because borders were closed for a very long time and then reopened, but in an asynchronous way. And also the internal mobility is quite difficult at present. The impact on research has not been so high, because it even received a boost during the lockdown, especially in the medical fields, life sciences, biotechnology, medicine, and so on. Maybe in the humanities, some restrictions stifled research, and many researchers from the humanities are still complaining of the situation. And of course, there has been an impact also on contractual research, because considering the economic crisis which has affected Italy, many enterprises had to cut funds also for research. The impact on funding was quite high, because the government passed a number of urgent measures to sustain universities, to sustain research and researchers, and also students' welfare. And our government invested about 1.4 billion euros in 2 years, which is roughly $1.7 billion on 3 main pillars. To cope with immediate emergency, and the first amount of money was allocated immediately on April 2020. To sustain research recruitment of researchers, and also national research programs, both in basic research and for technological research. And extra funds were allocated also to sustain the present academic year and the next academic year. Well, despite many pessimistic forecasts, there was no dropout in enrollment. Some preliminary statistics show a moderate increase of national students. Of course, there are some differentiation across the countries, but generally speaking, we can notice 2.3% plus since the previous year, even if this is lower than in 2019-2020. The enrollment of international students was most affected because many of them have not been able to come to Italy to complete their pre-enrollment procedure, which this year was performed totally online via a dedicated platform called Universitali. In this case, the ministry allowed universities to enroll these students as pending. And while waiting to come to Italy, they can follow online lessons, give online examinations, and also obtain credits. CRUI played an important role in supporting universities in this period, during and after the pandemic. CRUI was in constant dialogue with policymakers and acted as the main consulting body for the Ministry for University and Research. And together we identified a pool of university experts which participated in ad hoc working groups set up both by the ministry and by the government. The role of CRUI was also to exchange good practices and act as a sort of think tanks to find solutions to the main shared problems. The most active commissions were on ICT, international affairs, on teaching and learning, but also the Commission on Open Access and Open Science was very active, especially on centralized agreements and central negotiation with the electronic publisher. And we also sustained our universities with a communication and promotion activity, both at internal and external audience. Now, main challenges for the future. Surely to come back as soon as possible to face-to-face teaching, but in a new form, in a more integrated model, combining blended and flipped teaching, because it's absolutely clear that web-based teaching is revealing well-known hardships. The concept of mobility and internationalization need to be totally redefined at all levels. So what we can learn from this lesson is that we have to deal now with this new reality. We have to respond to its challenges and seize its opportunities, not just to manage an emergency, but structurally. So I thank you very much for your attention, and I hand here my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marina. That was fascinating also to see the more details of how you as a country, as a system have dealt with these problems. We have now about 15 minutes to engage in a discussion. I've got quite a lot of questions, so this is very exciting towards the end of the conference, that there's still sort of great activity. And I will start with the first one, which deals with how to figure out virtual mobility with a lack of devices and connection. I think this is a question that has come towards us in many times, and is sort of I know, a big headache. I don't know, Marina, do you have how have you dealt with that in Italy?
Yes, sure. Digital device is an issue in our country, especially in some part of the country. And this is one of the reasons why part of the state funds were devoted to to strengthen digital infrastructure and to provide the student with adequate devices, and also to negotiate with the main provider for to improve the line and give fair fees for students. So they had a discount both in buying devices and in contracting with the providers, like TIM or Vodafone or whatever.
Yes, and the topic of connection issues, particularly also probably is very often in remote areas. This is what I think what we've heard as well. Is this also something that you have looked at, or some universities have thought about it? How to address this?
Well, there were no specific problem with connections. No.
Okay.
No, maybe the problem was not the connection on itself, but if students had the adequate tools or devices to connect. But all the lines were strengthened, and also the special infrastructure for universities. There is a special infrastructure for universities named GARR. Is for universities and research, and that was strengthened and reorganized.
Okay, excellent, very good. Michael, do you want to add something to
that? I can. I think there have been connection issues, and I mean, just being here in Brussels, you have been sometimes a victim of connection issues, and certainly also because some of the students also are living, and also staff lived in rural areas or have moved back to rural areas during the crisis. So there were connection issues, but also in the metropolitan cities. But I also wanted to pick up on the question of devices, and there has been a discussion about what is called digital poverty, and precisely that not everybody has access to the right equipment. But my feeling is there are two schools. One is that get the equipment in to enable everybody to participate. And there's also another school which makes the point, find ways of teaching so that everybody can participate. So at the extremes, there are examples of people who taught through text messages, for example. Yeah, so I think it's really, there's a broad spectrum of answers. I mean, equipment is obviously one, but also thinking of lighter ways of providing digital learning would be another one.
Yeah, I've got one very interesting question that I want to pose to you, relating to the International Women's Day that's coming up. Did you come across any gender-specific challenges, and then how they could be overcome in the best possible way? Marina, is this something that
Well, this is not an issue during the pandemic. Not specific. We didn't find any specific problem on that.
Okay, so everyone suffered basically in an unbiased way. That the challenges were equally allocated. Yeah.
I think what we saw is that that women usually or often had to bear more tasks also in the crisis. So you could see that about staff who had to work from home, but was then immediately also in task of household and children, and so that women were much more burdened on that side. And another data, but that concerns probably more school children, we don't know really, but probably also university children, that if in a household with several young people, there is limited computer capacity, often males were given preference to access to digital devices.
Yeah, I think this is a topic that we're already touched upon in some other sessions as well in this summit, and I think more forms of it we will find later on when there's some more research being done about the real impact. I think that will certainly come up in the near future.
I mean, it's also not so surprising. You have seen this situation basically already before the crisis, but it came out much more strongly than in the crisis.
I think that's like so many things, and as our president yesterday said in a session that COVID-19 was a kind of rocket fuel to transformation of different things in a positive and negative way, both probably. Another question, I'm afraid we probably can't cover all questions, but it's excellent that there's so many coming up. One is really about the European programs such as Erasmus, particularly as they have funded mobility so much. And there's one question about, now that there's reduced mobility, where do these funds go, or where should they go?
I don't know actually where they go, but unless Marina knows. No. So I don't know where they go. But I know what happened is that the Commission said you can defer your mobilities, you can take them later. And you could also partly take them through virtual mobility. But the time that you would, the months that you would spend on virtual mobility, you would not receive a student grant for that. So the institutions would be paid, they would get the overhead, but the students wouldn't get the grant. And I think that made that even more or less attractive, so to say, even less attractive. You know, of course, everybody wanted the physical mobility. That's naturally, you don't want just to go to Italy to study there, but it's the whole learning experience and exchanging with colleagues and the cultural experience and then you're offered to do that online only. And you do not even get, I would say, the grant, and not even in a way, not the recognition for it. And I think the scheme was also so that you had at least to have a part of your experience as a physical on-campus experience to have this counted as a mobility. I think all this made it fairly unattractive to embark on virtual mobility then. I think it has just been deferred.
I think in general, this is also what we see from other European funding programs. Unfortunately, there's not big bunches of money left, particularly with also be it Marie Skłodowska CRUI actions where contracts had to be prolonged. So there have been actually huge difficulties for institutions to cover up the costs for example, students that have been stranded, or researchers or other staff that has been mobile, to cover for the cost that they actually incurred during that. So we also had to interact with the European Commission to really ensure that they also show a greater flexibility in the use of the European funds and not just keep it strictly to the books.
But I think that's another example, Thomas. As a Marie Curie researcher, for example, you could defer your grant, and extend it in a way. But I mean, you couldn't increase it. And somebody, in one way, you would have to pay for your living costs now. So, and I think that was a real problem for many in particular of the junior researchers.
We're already approaching the end, but I just still wanted to ask both of you one or two questions. So we really need to be very short and brief in the answers. The first one was, some of it already came out through the presentations, but if you could say, what are the two issues that have been really very helpful for universities during the pandemic? What would you sort of give to others as one or two really key issues from all the things that we've already presented, having in mind that we certainly are still in a phase that will continue in a bit. So I think that would be helpful also for the audience. Marina, maybe if you start.
Well, it's difficult to say because maybe the most important thing is never lose the occasion to innovate. So even reality is still changing around us, and we have some expectation at short terms or long terms, and we find out that what actually happens is in contradiction with our expectation. Universities have the power and the know-how to continuously innovate, adapt, and reschedule what what they have to do at any level. So I do not have a precise key message, but a sort of a message for an attitude.
Yeah, I think that's already very helpful, really, that sort of never lose the motivation to innovate. I think that was also, I'm reflecting again to what our president yesterday said in the session here, is never waste a good crisis. Of course, there are many difficult things that we have to deal with, but it also provides opportunities, as you say, Marina, to innovate and take the things that we're basically forced into doing something now. Michael, what would be your take on?
Yeah, I said already, prior experience. I think if we would have had this crisis around, 6-7 years earlier, it would have been even more difficult. But now there was some experience there on digital enhanced learning built up through this whole MOOC development and more frequent users. But then something that also came out of Marina's presentation quite strongly, and which has been confirmed in our survey, is that if you have structures there for exchange and collaboration, on which you could build within the institutions, but also at national level, what you mentioned, the exchanges you had with the ministry, and that has been confirmed really as very useful in the crisis, but also beyond. And I think also because it allows you to motivate students and staff, so agile contributing students and staff are important. And then what we also heard from several of the institutions is the fact that they had built a kind of strategy for learning and teaching, for example, so which goes probably hand in hand with the structures. So the strategy is also important, that you had something to bring people together.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, Michael. I think that is also very helpful for the audience. I need to come to a close now, as we have reached the time. We couldn't answer all questions that have been put forward. That's a good sign. I think that is really excellent. I would like to add one thing that has also been very important, is the question of leadership. Investment in leadership development. We've seen that coming out of the crisis, those institutions that had a very strong leadership throughout the institution, so it's not just at the top, but throughout the institution, managed to do this in a better way. So I think thanks to both of you, Marina and Michael, and also thanks to the audience who has posed very interesting questions. This is not the end here. We're going to continue, and I hope that this was helpful also for many of you. And of course, you also can contact us. You have the information in the packages of the summit, and I'm very much looking forward to also meet many of you again at another occasion, hopefully live in Istanbul. Thank you very much, and goodbye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.